welcome everyone to our third annual Autism Hope Summit. We are so excited to bring you so many amazing speakers and experts from all over the world. You know, today we have, I'm so excited for you guys because we have Dr. Mansoor Mohammed from Utrients. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for hosting me and being part of your community.
Well, I remember talking to you last year and I was just blown away of all the different things you were talking about, and I just think it's such a great honor to have you again for our third annual. And I want people that maybe missed last year's to kind of get an idea of why are you so passionate, you know, what is your work about, and you know, basically who are you?
Of course. I'm a clinical genomicist. I did my postdoctoral and clinical training at UCLA, so postdoctoral in cytogenetics. That's where we study chromosomes. We're looking at chromosomes and then ultimately what's inside of the chromosomes, your DNA. So of course, as parents, when we decide to have children, that's what we're passing on. We're passing on these chromosomes. And from a young age, even during my undergrad, I had a course and I saw chromosomes under the microscope for the first time. And I was just floored by the fact that here I am, I can actually see this thing that is passing on my legacy to when at that point I didn't have children. But ever since then, I was just in love with the concept that, my goodness, I can actually see these things that we pass on as parents to our children. Within them is our DNA. So the long and short of it, really at the end of the day, I'm just someone who loves DNA. I love genes. I love everything about genetics. And I've made it my passion. After my clinical training at UCLA, I first started as a cancer specialist, doing a lot of cancer diagnostics. But I had a rare and wonderful opportunity to then move on to Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. And I trained under some of the best developmental geneticists, meaning experts who were looking at genes not from a cancer perspective, which was my previous training, but genes from a perspective of how it impacts the development of the fetus and the child. And it was from there that obviously we started doing a lot of work regarding just overall childhood development, but autism specifically. And in the last few years, what I've done is I've really dedicated a large focus of my efforts, my research, my work toward understanding what are some of the broader causalities when it comes to autism from a genetic perspective. So that's who I am and that's what I do.
Well, I know when I met you last year, I mean, I just feel like everything, I wish we could just take your brain and, you know, download it. I mean, it's just, you're just so passionate about what you know, and you just, it shows. And I think the families today are going to get just an eye-opening experience to just a little bit of what you've discovered. And today we're going to talk about genomic advancements in the understanding of autism. And I think that that's something that we don't talk about enough. I think that we still are learning, definitely. And so I'm excited to talk about, you know, why is genomic testing so important for children on the spectrum?
So I think you nailed it, Kristen, and that is first and foremost, whenever I give talks, whether it be in autism or any other subspecialties that I'm involved in, I start the talk usually with a slide that says humility. And so I think the first thing I'd like to say to the audience and to the listeners is we're still learning. We're still learning. There's a lot that we don't know. We probably don't know more than we do know. But for what we do know, the advancements are fundamental, they're impactful, and they're really helping us appreciate, at least far better than we once did, why is someone on the autistic spectrum disorder? What is this developmental thing that impacts children? And what are some of the causalities? What influences the spectrum? Why is it some children present in a certain way and others in a different way? So, to your point, number one, we're making incredible advancements. Please, to the audience and the listeners, there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot that we don't understand. One of my pet peeves is where we try to label autism or the causations of autism on one gene or one variation in that gene, something that we touched upon the last time that we spoke. So today what I wanted to do, certainly with your permission, was to give you a sense of what are we understanding more, where are the data sets coming from, and what are we deducing from those data sets to shed light a bit more on causality, outcome, treatment options. That's what I'd like to speak of today.
Well, and I think that there's so much benefit for parents to really understand, you know, you were talking about we don't know enough, right? So
Absolutely.
when we're looking at the genomics of the whole body, right, the genes, why is that not being talked more about? Like, I feel like when we go to our just regular physical, right, why aren't we doing that typically? Like when we go to a doctor now, like why aren't they saying, hey, by the way, we're going to make sure that your iron's okay. We're going to make sure there are no deficiencies here. And we're also going to look at your genes to kind of see, you know, what maybe we're missing and what we can help more with. Why is that not happening? Especially why is that not happening yet with children on the spectrum who are already so immune compromised?
Absolutely. I think the biggest, certainly from my perspective, and again, it's just my perspective, it's a small insight into the bigger picture. But one of the biggest reasons, to your point, that I see is in the practice of Western medicine, something that obviously saves countless lives, we, however, tend to focus on this concept of just disease causation. So, for example, when it comes to when we first viewed or started to consider genetics as it relates to autism, what we were looking for, we meaning the research communities, we wanted to find that one gene, that if there was a mutation or variation in it, this is the cause. And this is something of the mindset of the way we approach either Western medicine or the Western research. I keep using this term Western, not to be misleading, but it's just how research tends to be conducted. It's sort of, we want to find that one cause and then create a pharmaceutic to address that one cause. That may have been the case, but certainly as we started to research and look at the genomes, the genetic makeup of autistic children, we didn't find, and we haven't found, that one magic bullet cause for autism. And so because of that, somewhere along the line, we've sort of lost this intensity that there is something that we could look at, that there can be genetic contributors to autism, because after all, if we couldn't treat it with one pharmaceutic, it meant that it wasn't important enough. What we've learned, instead of it being a single bullet, one gene, one mutation, one variation cause, is that there can be accumulation of things that under the right, or in this case the wrong circumstances, together creates a developmental environment for that fetus, for that young child, that again, when stressed, meaning we start with a genomic collection of things that places that child at risk, and then if that child, with that collection of genomic risk factors, then gets exposed to environmental circumstances that other children are getting exposed to, but then when we create that perfect storm, we're finding those are the primary triggers for children on the spectrum. So to step back then and to summarize, we're not finding that one bullet cause. And I think this is the reason that it's not coming up in the medical jargon, because it's just not easy enough to say, here's that gene that we found, and this is why you're going to have that's why your child is on the spectrum. We're not seeing that. It's a much more complicated discussion, but just because it's complicated doesn't mean that we can't approach it intelligently, doesn't mean that we can't approach making logical steps and decisions for the betterment of the children.
Now, is there a benefit in parents, especially mothers, those with children with autism? Is it a benefit for us to be tested either prior to having children to maybe see what we might be sensitive to or our child might be sensitive to? And is it also important for us after we have a child with autism, or any child for that matter, right?
Of course.
To also be tested. So I feel like as parents, we're not always looking at us, put it this way, I have brown eyes, right? My son has brown eyes. I have brown hair. My son has brown hair. I have issues with food intolerances. He has food intolerances. So we know that kind of thing, but yet we don't think about, hey, what about our genes? And maybe there was something we could have done to help our immune system prior, or even right now, we can maybe prevent something that potentially could happen.
Well, first and foremost, obviously, he's your beautiful son. So he is from you and he's from your hubby. And so obviously there are going to be traits that he shares, independent of the fact that he's on the spectrum. But there are going to be many traits that he shares because he is, after all, your angel. He's your son. Having said that, per your first question, I do feel, from my perspective, and this again returns to what we're seeing, at least in the research that I've done, what we're seeing as contributors to children on the spectrum is we're seeing that they, especially when you look at enough of these children, okay, and again, it's a spectrum, so let's be clear. Not everything that I'm about to say is going to apply to every autistic child, because it's a spectrum. But what we're seeing trends that stand boldly. We're seeing that the children have fundamentally compromised or inefficient detox capacity. I'm speaking in broad terms. They're going to be very specific components of their detox capacity. So as human beings, let's just step back. As a human being, one of the most important adaptive qualities of the human body is we've got to be able to eat, we've got to be able to digest our foods, absorb nutrients. One of the most important things our genetic blueprint gives us as human beings is the ability to detoxify, to neutralize the things that constantly we're exposed to. And of course, in a modern world, we're exposed to more harmful things than we were or likely were 300, 400 years ago. So there are some very important traits, genetic traits, that every human being should inherit, and it dramatically determines our capacity to deal with the toxins of a modern world. One of the first things we're seeing with many autistic children is these genetic traits that contribute to their total detox capacity is flawed or insufficient or inefficient. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. Now, that was inherited. It was inherited, and maybe in them, it was inherited in a way that it met a critical mass, meaning maybe neither parent had as inefficient detox capacities, but as those genes were filtered and inherited in the child ends up with the least, between the parents, the least efficient detox capacity, and then that child is now in a greater risk category. So to your point, now that we understand this is just one of the contributors to what can go on to develop autism, yes, I think it's important for parents, and particularly the mum as the receptacle, as the person who's carrying this miracle within her, to understand if she carries a reduced or inefficient capacity to neutralize toxins and keep toxins away, particularly in this critical time of pregnancy. You know, we seem to forget that pregnancy is, and I'm going to use this word and it's going to please understand the context, it's a medical condition. During pregnancy, your body is not in a normative state. Lots of things are happening. And those things that are happening during the pregnancy of a woman are going to dictate so much the environment of that fetus that she's carrying. So I do think that now that we begin to see, we're not looking necessarily for the majority of children on the spectrum for that one magic bullet, but we're looking for a summation of events, both environmental during the pregnancy and post-pregnancy, but also summation of genetic events that contribute to the risk factors. It's important that we begin to start looking at the parents. We begin to start looking at what are their capacities for detoxification, anti-inflammation, nutrient absorption, nutrient utilization, and appreciate that some of those things will contribute to the risk of the child. Therefore, it's important that the parents understand where they stand.
Now, as you're talking, I started thinking, so let's say I have a particular gene that I pass on to Jackson, or any mom out there passes on to their child. Mm-hmm. Okay, and maybe for me, the world when I was living in it at his age or as a young child, it wasn't as toxic as it is today. Yes. My detoxification pathway was able to detoxify far less of an assault, right?
Yes.
Is that also a factor of, why would I carry a gene that I was okay with, but then he has it and now this world's just different?
Absolutely. And remember, as that miracle was developing within you, there are stages of development. As Jackson was developing in your womb, during different months of your pregnancy with him, different parts of his body were developing based on a blueprint that he inherited from you and dad, you and your hubby. Now, so what we've got to look at is we've got to understand where during these stages of development, if there was an insult, would it have impacted longitudinal brain behavior development? So to your point, it's not just what you were exposed to, at a time when you were a kid or you were a child or you were an embryo in mom's womb. It's also understanding specific hot spots in development, what he might have been exposed to that you, a parent, were not exposed to when you were developing. And there are many, many things. It's clear that the rate of autism, certainly in certain places and geographies, are on the rise. It's certainly clear. This is not just ascertainment bias. Ascertainment bias means when we look for something, we find it more. So that is a contributing factor. But taking that away, the numbers do show that there is a rise. Okay, why is there a rise? Have we somehow as a human race, just within 2 or so generations, changed genetically? The answer is no. So something else must have been contributing. This has led to the debate. Is it genetic? Is it environmental? Is it lifestyle? And I think, unfortunately, people think that it has to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It simply has to be that there's a genetic predisposition, and that predisposition is now being unveiled because of changes in our environment. So let me come back to the point that you made. What about you, mum? Wonderful, healthy, certainly not on the spectrum. And Jackson, wonderful, healthy, but on the spectrum. What changed there? Let's take just one gene, Kristen. This gene is called the GSTT1 gene. The GSTT1 gene is one of the most important genes in the human body, in our blueprint, that helps to determine our capacity to detoxify that which we're faced with. Any number of things, including, by the way, many medications go through when we take them. They are detoxified, neutralized by this gene. Now, when we think of genes, and you implicitly mentioned this when you asked the question, we think of genes and we say, well, okay, we all have the gene, and we just have maybe different versions of that gene. But this gene is really important. It's really important in detoxification, but it's also really important because of a phenomena that affects it. You see, for every gene in our blueprint, we should have 2 copies of that gene. One copy that we inherited from mom, another copy of the same gene that we inherited from dad, such that every human being, generally speaking, for the vast majority of our genes, we've got 2 copies. But for this gene, a phenomena affects it, wherein many people, many healthy people, myself included, have only 1 copy of that gene. Now, all it takes is for 2 parents with 1 copy of that gene apiece. Now, look what's going to happen. Each of those parents with 1 copy of that gene, each of them will have a decent enough capacity to detoxify themselves from environmental insults. But because they only had 1 copy of that gene, they've now got a chance to pass on 0 copies of that gene to their child. So now we've got a child born to parents, each of whom had 1 copy, but that child has 0 copies of that important detox gene. So to answer your question now, this is why we can have Kristen, someone who grew up, she grew up in a modern world faced with toxins, maybe not as much as Jackson was faced with in his new environment. But the point being is that Jackson is now woefully less efficient at dealing with toxic exposures and challenges, particularly if and when those challenges occurred at fundamentally important stages in his brain development, embryonic development, post-embryonic development. He's just that much less capable of handling those toxic challenges. And this is not, let me put it in a positive way, this is now being explored in a very research-centric manner. This is good research. We're beginning to understand that this is an incredibly important part of the causation of autism. And it's just one of the aspects, because I said earlier, it's multifactorial. So what's going to happen? If you had a child who, for example, was missing that gene, number 1, that same child independently then has a system in the cells known as methylation. Methylation being a cellular process that is important for so many cellular processes, but importantly to maintain neurologic anti-inflammation, meaning the system methylation keeps our neurons healthy. Now, what will be one of the things that could challenge the development of our neurons? Toxins. Certain toxins, if and when present in the body, can cause massive neurologic inflammation. Now, why would those toxins have been there? If there was exposure to those toxins. And why would they have been there at a high level in a person? Potentially if the person had a reduced capacity to remove said toxins. So we start with, does that person have a good detox capacity? Yes, no. If no, what is his capacity or her capacity to maintain neurologic anti-inflammation? If that process is inefficient, we now have two things working against this child. Now, would that have been sufficient in and of itself? Maybe not, because we're still waiting now to determine, did that child get exposed to the things that he or she maybe should not have been exposed to, but not just not exposed to at that particular time during his or her embryonic and post-embryonic development. Do you start to see how the pieces come together?
So now that we know that,
yes,
we do this test and we learn about, the different genes and what's going on in our kid's body, and we learn that maybe we have one and they have zero of whatever that detoxification pathway is. Is there a way to manage this now to help them be able, without that particular gene, do we have the medicine or the advancement in this world to be able to say, hey, if we gave that supplement or we gave this or we gave that, now we know because you have zero of this that your body can't do it no matter what. So now we have to help with that. Is there management out there for that?
I think with caution, there's improving management for that. And I start with caution because I don't want to even attempt to convey that there's a cure or that it's, invariably we can do something about it. I would say that the management starts with first appreciating, okay, if as parents this is what we carry, and now that we know what our gene versions are, we understand that there's a potential without being stressed or overly concerned about this, but we at least appreciate here is what might be passed on to our children. Number one. Number two, we take that knowledge to determine, because we can test children earlier rather than later, we could appreciate what is that genomic blueprint that ultimately coalesced in my child. Now, if I know that, then I can more intelligently make certain first fundamental decisions, things that my child might be exposed to, things that I might otherwise not be concerned that he or she was exposed to, versus now I would appreciate, you know what, I've got to just be a little bit more careful. And this is not to add yet another thing. Parenting in our modern world is not easy. It's never been easy. But, parents have to think about a lot of things when it comes to keeping their children healthy. So I don't want to create something here that creates a paranoia, but it intelligently equips us as parents to make more informed decisions. I think that's where the management starts first. Now, for the parents who are already dealing with children on the spectrum, what it begins to offer us is, and I need to pause and take a step back here, because we do have to appreciate, if a child is on the spectrum, it would indicate that a certain degree of neurologic function, development, has been affected, has been perturbed at a point in development. Something happened at a point in development. We do have to appreciate that, and that's why we're seeing the symptomology that we are. So when we approach a therapeutic or interventive or management perspective, we do need to keep in mind, potentially, what has already happened from a developmental perspective. But more importantly, can we do anything to optimize that outcome? Understanding that there may be some things that neurologically, developmentally have already occurred. With that in mind, and with the knowledge that we spoke of in terms of, is this child now moving forward? Will he or she continue to have a challenge in how they're detoxifying themselves in the environment within which they live? Number one. Number two, is he or she having a challenge in regard to their cellular processes like methylation, like certain nutrient absorptions, things that are fundamentally driven genetically? And if we know these things, at least what we can do, and this much I can say from a management perspective, is we make more informed decisions, we make more personal, purposeful decisions as to what our children should be, A, environmentally, lifestyle choices that we make, and B, nutrient decisions. And this is not because I'm sitting in a company called Utrient. In fact, Utrient is just it's my latest endeavor, because I started to realize that we can make an impact when we understand that there are specific nutrient derivatives that some of us, either because genetically we lack the ability to absorb these ingredients, or our cellular processes are inefficient at using these ingredients, that we can impact overall health by purposefully, intelligently reintroducing those ingredients into our diet. And that's the only reason I'm involved in this endeavor. So this is not about telling folks they've got to go take supplements. It's telling folks that, yes, there's a time and a place to understand that your child might be inefficiently absorbing certain things, inefficiently utilizing certain things, and that cumulatively that can impact cellular, organal, and overall function and development. And if we were to take a step back, reintroduce those things intelligently, we are seeing improvements, sometimes drastically, not always, but at least sometimes moderately for these children.
Now, I know you mentioned the company Utrans. I wanted to spend a little bit of time because I want them to understand. So you guys have a testing, a kit of some sort that basically a child, from what I remember, a child spits into a tube and that tube gets sent off. So for those right now, because I'm going to bring this part up before we ask about this, because I know some parents are like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to get my child to spit. Because let me just tell you, it took me some time, guys. So, but there's definitely some techniques, and, you know, and if you guys reach out to me, I'm more than happy to, you know, tell you how I got it done. But it was definitely persistence, but we definitely made some games around it. And, you know, one of the things you guys said was, you know, you can actually first also, you have to make sure the cup is clean, but you can spit in the cup and just kind of keep collecting that and then pour that cup into the vial, which was really helpful. But yeah, if you guys do need help with that, please reach out to me. I'll give you guys some fun tips. I don't know how fun spitting is, but I definitely did some fun things around that because I really wanted to get that saliva. But anyways, past that, I know you guys have that kit. You get it sent. We send it to you guys. You guys then give it back to us. And then here's the thing. For many of us, we've heard of different organizations or companies that, I'm just going to say, one comes to mind is 23andMe, that it's out there. People talk about that. And then what happens is we think, oh, I can do that. You know, it's the same. And the one thing I learned from you guys last year is, no, it's not the same. It's totally different. But the other thing is, you guys actually, not only do we send this kit to you, we then talk to you about it afterwards, because often you read something and, I mean, I don't know about you guys, when you're reading stuff, you're like, I don't know what that means. Yeah, I don't know, or maybe you interpret it in a totally different way. And you guys kind of sit down and say, here's your kind of navigation, you know, like your pathway, your journey. This is what we recommend based on your genetics. And this is a custom, you know, kind of fit based on that. And that's how my interpretation is. Do you? Oh, well,
I've got little to add to that, because that is exactly what we're doing. And mind you, you've brought up maybe about 2 or 3 important points. And the first, of course, is taking the saliva. We chose saliva because, of course, it's as non-invasive as possible, particularly for children. But then we realized soon enough, you being one of the first to point out, with children on the spectrum, maybe something that you think is as simple as spitting in a tube, we get spit when we don't want it, and then we don't get enough spit when we do want it. So, saliva, that is. So, there are definite ways, because the tube uses a stabilizer, a solution, that keeps that sample preserved such that you can take days or even weeks to slowly accomplish collecting the sample, and it will work perfectly fine. Now, on this point, Kristen, several families have asked me, you know, Mansoor, another test, maybe 23andMe or others, they might use a swab, and it's not a spit sample. Wouldn't that be much easier? Because, you know, just and then swab. One thing that you've got to understand is, because our test is different, because what we're doing is we're looking at really important genes, some of the quality of the DNA, the amount of the DNA that you need to have to do that particular test is way more than you would get were you to just do a swab. You need more DNA, and you need DNA with a better quality. So first and foremost, that's the reason we use a saliva, to answer one question. The next point that you raised, or one of the points that you raised, is why, if I've already got 23andMe, which, has done an incredible service to the community, bringing an understanding of DNA, making people fall in love with this thing that I'm already in love with. But the 23andMe test, as good as it may be, does not cover all of the functional, fundamental pathways, and this is important, Kristen. I really, for anyone that's listening, if you have been introduced to the concept of DNA, to genes, and that you've begun to appreciate that, listen, what might this be? How relevant is this to my child? If you take one thing away from me, take this. Genes, that which is encoded in your DNA, they are important, but singly in and of themselves, what you've got to understand is rarely is it, especially something like the spectrum, one gene that you should be focused on. What you need to understand is how genes interact, how they interact to accomplish cellular processes, because ultimately it's a process, it's a cascade, it's a pathway that might not be happening efficiently. And one gene does not define a pathway. So when you do what we consider to be intelligent genetic testing, you've got to understand which genes work together. What are those genes? How they work together, how to interpret how they work together. And those are some of the things that you might not get from that 23andMe test, but those are the things that we've designed our tests to ensure that we're telling the stories. We're telling the stories of how cells work. So that's the next important thing. And then finally, as you also said, many times someone would say, my goodness, Mansoor, I'd read about this gene. Pick a gene. I'd read of the methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase gene, that all-important MTHFR gene. But after I heard you speak about it, I never understood that that's what that gene does. So in other words, we can get a gene result, and it's a correct gene result, and it can be duplicated by 10 different labs. But the interpretation, understanding what that result actually means, this is, if I were to say one thing, that's what we do really well. Because ultimately, again, after saying everything about the test, the different types of tests, ultimately what you want is you don't want just a piece of data in front of you. You want to be able to understand how to interpret that. What is this going to mean and what it means in the big picture? And I think too many companies, because they're not researchers, because they're not academicians or clinicians, they're missing that bigger picture. Myself, I see literally thousands of families, literally. And when you start to see that your DNA is not a few letters on a piece of paper or report, but you have the person sitting in front of you, the intimacy with which you begin to appreciate how things manifest, how to interpret, how to look for trends, that's where I think the real core benefit is. And that's what we bring. So we bring that interpretation that I think is quite unique. And then the final point that you made was, then how do we bring that all to bear? We bring that to bear by saying, and we're not a supplement company. This is a misunderstanding of what we do. In fact, we didn't set out to be a supplement company. What we set out to be is ask some basic questions. Number one, can we understand certain clues, certain things embedded in a person's DNA that helps us appreciate what is that person not doing cellularly efficiently or not? Can we understand it? Yes, no. And then if we could understand it, would that lead us to better appreciating what that person needs? Can we give that person something? Now that we understand they're not doing at the cellular level, something's not happening efficiently, can we give them something? And in this case, nutraceutically, a nutrient derivative that improves that cellular function. And you'd be surprised, Kristen, with good, excellent research, how many examples of that we have. So once we appreciated that, hey, we could understand someone's DNA makeup, we could improve their overall outcome. And I don't just mean children on the spectrum or people that are ill. I just mean for the average person. For the average person, how many of us are walking around not appreciating what does our specific body need that it's not getting? And that's what we're trying to fill. We're trying to fill that individual, intelligent, research-driven, scientifically vetted understanding of the DNA and what we can give to someone to improve their overall health metrics. That's what we're doing, Kristen.
Well, I think that, so many of us, you think genes, you think, even DNA. It's so, other than science class in high school, I mean, you don't really learn much past that other than you. I wish we all got as excited. I wish many doctors got as excited as you guys have, and you especially, about genes and about making this custom kind of plan for us. And I know you said it's not a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't mean that it's going to be this miracle thing. But what I love about it is it gives us, and as parents, at least with me, I'm always thinking, I wish I could just go inside Jackson's body and really understand what's going on, right?
Absolutely.
And so I feel like it kind of gives us that little bit of, really not little, it's a lot, of an insight of, hey, this is what's going on. This is why this could be happening. And then when you're looking down the road, you can think, well, wait a second. I know this about my child. So if I know this about my child or about myself or whomever is doing this test, I now know that I am very sensitive to this. I know that this world's going to attack me from here and there. And you know what I got to do? I got to protect myself. So it's kind of like how I think of it is when you go out in the rain, you know to protect yourself from the rain, you need an umbrella. Well, it's the kind of same thing of where, okay, I know my genes and my DNA makeup means that I'm a little bit sensitive to this or I'm a lot sensitive to that, and I now need something, quote unquote, of an umbrella to kind of help that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to get wet when I go outside, but it means I'm not going to get soaked perhaps. And so,
Beautiful.
Anyways, that's how I'm thinking of it. At least.
Yeah, beautiful. I'll give you a personal example, Kristen, both personal and then how it manifested into something very clinical. So on my maternal side of my lineage, there are certain health concerns that keep repeating themselves without getting into any further details. And through colleagues, both when I was at UCLA, Bilateral Medicine, I would discuss these concerns because I was painfully aware that this particular health concern keeps showing up on my mother's side of the family. The long and short of it, interestingly and serendipitously, many of my colleagues started to point to the fact that, these things keep coming up. It looks as though there may be a methylation, this wonderful thing that we've been speaking about, concern in your family. And as the years went by, and then of course I ended up doing the clinical research that I do, sure enough I discovered that my methylation cycle is abysmally inefficient, particularly as it relates to the B12 side of the methylation cycle. For those of you out there, methylation is largely driven by two vitamins, B9, folate, B12, cobalamin. And both of those cycles together comprise methylation. Now, the B12 side of the cycle is what affected myself. But because the B12 side of the cycle interacts with the B9 side of the cycle, what I would say is this. When it was first brought to my attention that my methylation was suboptimal, I was told you need a really good B complex that you should take. And this was coming from MD colleagues, researchers. And I would go out there and I'd buy these B complex, and every time that I would take them, and believe me, it got to the point where my wife forbade me from buying any more because I had on my shelves like 7 B complex from different providers. Every one that I took, I would take it thinking that this was going to be right for me, but I would end up feeling awful in the hours after taking it. I would feel jittery. I would feel the sense of a migraine was coming on. And I couldn't understand it, and it was clear and repeatable. When I took the supplement, that's what I felt like. Fast forward a couple of years to find out that one of the most repeated constituents in a good B complex is something called 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. It's a specific activated form of folate. And it's activated, that's why it's in the complex. And many providers use that form of folate in their B complex, and that's what I'd been taking. Once I finally worked out the full methylation cycle genetically, and that's part of the test that we do, and I ran it on myself, the first thing I realized was the last thing I should be taking is 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. And immediately, the version of the B9 that I was supposed to have been taken was something called folinic acid, not folic acid, and certainly not 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. So I blended myself a version of a B complex with that one change in which there was no 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, but folinic acid. Kristen, if I could tell you the change that has made for me, for the first time, I can actually take a B complex without a deleterious consequence, so that's one. But B, the clarity, the reduction in inflammatory signals in my body, brain function, I felt like I was waking up from a fog after taking this supplement. And that's just one example of something that I had to learn about myself. Now, mind you, that applies to my children. So now let me take that in the context of, and this is going to be difficult for me because my children are all my angels. My middle boy, they're all, but he knows my other kids knows he's my angel. He inherits from me that poor methylation cycle, which means that he's particularly susceptible to inflammatory reactions. I'm speaking very generally, so the medical doctors, the researchers out there, please know that I'm not speaking superficially, I'm just keeping things simple. He also inherited a particularly poor combination of detox genes, He has a love for art. And a few years ago, one summer, in his summer break, he started experimenting with spray paint. And I warned him that some of the things that he was being exposed to, his body was less capable of handling those chemicals and the things that he was using. By the end of that summer, Kristen, he started developing vitiligo, bilateral vitiligo, by the end of the summer. We took him to a dermatologist who looked at us, and I would never forget this appointment. The dermatologist took one look and said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing that you can do about it. That's what it is. It's vitiligo. It's incurable." That was my medical appointment with this person. As a parent, and certainly as a parent doing what I do, I refused to believe that, because here was my son in his early teenage years. He was starting to develop vitiligo, which, fine enough, but I wanted to be able to do something for him. I went back and I looked at his detox genes. I went back and I looked at the fact that his methylation, that thing that is anti-inflammatory, because we now understand that vitiligo has a huge inflammatory component. It has a huge component of mitochondrial dysfunction, energy-producing compartments of the cell. And what we did was we formulated something for him that improves his detox, reduces his inflammation, i.e. improves his methylation per what I did for myself, and improves mitochondrial function. By the time we started to give him this, both entire eyelids were completely gone of pigmentation, so they were completely pigment loss, and he started developing the classic mucosal loss of pigmentation here. Within 3 months, all pigmentation was returned, and now he just has a sliver of pigment loss on the middle of his lens. I am not saying that this is necessarily always going to be the case. God willing, it continues to benefit him. But what I am saying is, when you begin to approach these things intelligently and understand specifically and individually what's going on, you can make a change, or at least you can intelligently attempt to make a change, providing it is safe, providing that it is within the realm of what would have been recommended had we known what was going on. And that's just my personal story, and that's the thing that I hold on to when I speak to families, because it's something that I live.
And I think all of us and everybody watching, we all have that thing we live. We all have that journey, and so we all might have different journeys.
Absolutely.
We all have different, we all feel it. We all have different, examples of that. And as I'm listening to your story, I'm like, oh my goodness, like if he didn't have you in my head, I'm thinking, if he didn't have you as a dad that like knew about this, that could go on and try to figure this out, like for the most of us, we don't have a lab, we don't know what to test, we wouldn't know, we'd go to the dermatologist and the dermatologist says, we might go online and try to figure out what we could, but the fact that he was born to you, that you could figure that out. And then I started thinking, the parents watching right now, our kiddos are born to us and we're here. We don't have a lab, we don't have all the answers, but how great and how awesome that we have seminars like this, that we can learn, from people like you and other experts out there that can, kind of give us, I feel like, at least some tips and tools and some amazing resources. And everything doesn't work for everybody. However, gosh, if we can save some hours off Google, that's what I always think, how confusing is Google? And thousands of pages pop up and you're like, I don't know which is right. And so to be able to kind of fine tune that, I'm so happy. Or I was listening to this and thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen? Like, is the pigmentation come back? You know, and the fact that it did, I mean, you know, that's just one example of.
It's just one. It is. It is just one example. Absolutely.
And listening to these families that are emailing us and talking to us on a daily basis. And guys, if there's just even one thing that we can learn about our kiddos that we didn't know before, that can potentially just take a little bit of that stress off, right? Imagine what our kids are so sensitive just to even a little bit amount of stress. Imagine what that can open up in their world. So how do families, you know, if they're wanting to contact you guys, I mean, I know the website's going to be here in the link, so we know that.
Yes.
You know, do you guys have other ways? Is it just to the website? Is it phone? Is it, do you guys have Facebook yet, or?
Obviously, through the website, we do have our contact numbers. And what I have done in my clinical practice, I think when we last spoke last summer, literally it was taking months for someone to get an appointment with me. And what we've done, Kristen, purely because of your generosity, you know, when I tell people I've met this person and she's a mom, and you would not believe what a mom does when she says she's not going to take no for an answer. And I've used you as an example in so many different talks that I've given us. This is the passion that we need when we want to change something. So because of your interaction with us, what we've done is I've now cleared 2 clinic days for a period of time where we're offering those days and time within those days specifically to speak to families within your society and the AHA group. So, and Kristen, you probably don't, you might be able to tell your society, we've done this and we're offering it basically as a scholarship to families as a part of a give back to the community. It's really for me and for families to speak. I tell you, I learn more from the families than I think families learn from me. So then why are you going to speak to Dr. Mansoor? I do think that they get certain things, and I certainly can at least help them to understand some of what they might want to consider. But the point is this: when you asked how they can get to us, we've opened up this time. We're offering the scholarship specifically to your community. It's for a period of time because, again, my calendar is, you know, I live on a plane, I give lectures all over the world, and then my clinical practice as a clinical genomicist. But this is something that we're giving back to the community. It can be reached through the website. We have a number that it can be reached to. We are launching our Facebook page so that individuals can obviously interact with us. I am probably one of the last of the Mohicans. I'm incredibly social media illiterate, so I have to depend on others to make sure that that's there. But the point is this, and Chris and I assure you one thing, and for any of the families that have already spoken to me through the AHA, I never turn anyone away. I simply can't. I simply cannot turn a family away. If I just told you what I did, and it was hard for me to tell you what I did for my son, who is a healthy, strapping young man now, and many of his friends and girls think it's kind of cool, the little sliver that he has left. Much less for a child who is being affected or parents and children dealing with something more profound than that. I've been given a blessing to understand a little something about genomics and about health, and I think it's my responsibility to share that with those who speak. So I will never turn anyone away. They can contact us, and I will do my utmost to speak to as many of the families as possible.
Well, and I know that your generosity, guys, he usually, his fee for the general public, because as you can tell, the first time I met him, I was just blown away. I could have sat there and listened all day long. And his fee is usually so much more. And as an amazing gift to anybody in AHA's community, Autism Hope Alliance, what he's doing for them and the summit is they're offering, as he said, a scholarship, and that's going to pay for partial of the consult. But gosh, I mean, to be able to talk to somebody like him, to get that insight, to know that normally it would be so much more. We can't even say thank you enough for that. I mean, I've spoken to you, you know, my son's father has spoken to you. We've learned so much just even about ourselves, you know, and with our child. And, you know, for me, you know, we all got this. I don't know any mom that has not said this. If I could just go inside and kind of see what was going on. And the fact that he can then look at everything and say, hey, this is what's going on. I mean, how many of us get a medical, you get blood work and everything else back, and they give you like this stack, and it's like all these pretty colors and like these little graphs and all these numbers. This arrow is pointing that way, that arrow is pointing this way. I don't know about you guys. I'm always like, okay, is red bad? I think green must be good, and yellow, I must be okay, right? That's about what I get out of it. And so, you know, to be able to talk to somebody that then can talk to us in our terms, you know, it's like, hey, Kristen, this is what's going on. Okay, I had that totally makes sense, you know, like that. Now I understand why X, Y, and Z. Now what do we do about it? And then he can then explain that. So to me, oh my gosh, thank you so much for everything that you've given to Autism Hope Alliance. I think that so many people are watching. I'm always blown away talking to you. I think I forgot who I was speaking to, but this is how I describe you. One of the most brilliant minds that I've ever spoken to. And I can feel your passion. I know that you know what you're talking about. And you're not sitting out there saying, you know, hey, you know, I have the magic answer, or I have the magic pill. You know, if there was one, trust me, guys, I'd be on the rooftop screaming it. The fact that we can just find even one little answer out here and maybe another answer out there. I mean, that's what it's going to take. It's a step by step, day by day. We say it's not, you know, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we have to keep on going. Now, I know last year, guys, we had, like I said, this is our third annual summit. Last year we did one. He was on last year, which again, we've talked about that. So if you guys want to get last year's summit and this year's summit, and you want to be able to watch it over and over again, please make sure to go to autismhopesummit.org. You can like upgrade for this awesome package. It gives you all these, you can enter for all these raffles during, you know, this week. It's just going to be awesome for you guys. We've really worked our butts off trying to make sure we guys give you everything we can. We want to give you these resources. You know, what I love about things like this is that as a parent, we're so busy. Like, you know, we're trying to go to IEP meetings. We're going to doctor's appointments. We're trying to figure out the different therapy sessions. Sometimes it's impossible to even be able to have time to go to the store, let alone fly to a conference, take off 4 to 5 days, find the finances to do that. You guys I'm hoping you're watching in your pajamas right now, having a glass of wine, you know, writing down these notes. And so that's why we do this, guys. This is why we put this together, because, you know, he can't be everywhere. We can't be everywhere. But right now we're in your living room or on your computer or however you're watching us. And, you know, all I can say is there is hope. There is help, and this is Hope with a Plan. And so thank you so much for being with us today. I always enjoy talking with you. I learn something every time. And for all of you guys, again, the links will be here in the video so you guys can find him, and definitely take advantage of that opportunity that he's offering you guys with partial scholarships. So again, thank you guys, and just never give up. All right, bye guys.